And now it is my honor to get to introduce the facilitator of the next panel. She really needs no introduction. She is a consistent game changer in our industry and receiver of many awards and recognition. I'm so happy to call her my friend, Rebecca Jensen, CEO of IMRED. I wanted to say all the words. I couldn't do it. Thank you.
Shelley. Good afternoon. You know, one of my favorite quotes is that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And no surprise that that was said by a computer engineer many years ago. And when you think about that and you look at technology to adopt, sometimes you wonder, is this new thing going to be a game changer? Is it going to just be like, not so big of a deal, you know, like QR codes or something? Or is it just something that's a buzzword and at the end of the day it's going to lead to a dead end? And so I think that that is a great question to ask with respect to one of these new technologies that has been name dropped a lot throughout not just this conference but in many other areas. It wasn't too long ago that I was driving to the Chicago O'Hare Airport and there was a giant billboard up there that said, "Got blockchain?" ? And I thought, oh my gosh, you know, what is happening with blockchain and technology? And so today we're going to have a conversation about what it is, what it can mean, and we have a wonderful panel here that is going to explain what's happening not only with blockchain technology in real estate, but also outside of real estate. And so I'm going to ask the panel, please introduce yourselves for the audience.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's really nice to be here. It's an honor to be able to speak on this subject. I was asked, how did I get involved? Well, it was curiosity. I'm the CEO of the Toronto Real Estate Board, but before that, I was the CIO. And so it's in my inner geek to know these things. And I spent a lot of time researching it from day one. And then ultimately ended up having what I thought was going to be a social lunch with David Charon. Is he here? And then next thing you know, I'm writing articles, I'm speaking panels, and here I am today. And I also was involved with, and am involved with our federal government to talk about these matters as we speak. But primarily, the interest is in the MLS.
Awesome, thanks, John. And another John.
Sure. My name is John Kang, co-founder and CEO of a startup called Reezy. So we're an online escrow, a digital escrow service that focuses on secure and seamless home closings. But we use blockchain as our financial backbone to transfer money and make sure the money's taken care of. So myself, I'm a veteran of the real estate industry. I've been a loan officer for 5 years, still active. Also been a former realtor and investor in properties. But also, I would say my core, though, is software development. I've been doing that for about 12 years and counting. And I also led financial innovation at some of the largest manufacturing companies in the world. So, yeah, I think this is a perfect nexus for my skill set, what I'm working on.
Great, thanks, John. Mark?
Yep, Mark Lesswing. Been involved with the real estate industry for nearly 2 decades. Before that, doing all kinds of technology things. I've been on the standard side and been looking at this blockchain technology for a couple of years. It's very exciting. So now I'm on the entrepreneur side, on the investing side of that.
Great, thank you. And before we turn to the panel, I thought it might be helpful first to talk about a little bit about what is blockchain just from a high level. And we actually have just 2 slides here, which hopefully will appear. There we go. So blockchain is actually a technology that dates back 10 years, a whole decade, which in technology, I don't know what that is, but it's more than a decade, right? And as we all know, 10 years ago, life was a lot different. The financial crisis was in full swing. And there was either a person or a group of people, it's really unknown, that published a white paper on the Bitcoin blockchain. And the reason that it was published for Bitcoin was not just because banks were failing left and right and people were uncertain about their financial institutions, but as you'll all recall, the Federal Reserve was just cranking out money and nobody really knew when it was going to stop. And so the value of the dollar was definitely at issue. And so the blockchain was invented in a way to take the power away from a centralized source, that being the Federal Reserve, and distributing it among everybody that would hold a currency. And so that was the emphasis of the Bitcoin blockchain. Now, Bitcoin and blockchain are two different things. As with many technologies, they start out as one thing and they end up something different. I learned recently that bubble wrap actually started out as wallpaper in the 1950s. And I don't know if that's a sign of the 50s and decor or if they just had toddlers, I'm not sure. But obviously, bubble wrap has morphed into something else. And so that, I think, definitely applies to blockchain because we can take the underlying structure of it and apply it outside of currency. And so there are a few characteristics of blockchain that I think it's important for you to understand, because when you're trying to figure out whether or not a blockchain is a valid application or just a buzzword that you're going to hear about by calling a billboard, keep these items in mind. Number one is that tech people like to say immutable, which basically just means you can't change it. So in the Bitcoin world, blockchain was developed to be a ledger that recorded transactions. If I had a Bitcoin and I wanted to give it to John, then the blockchain would record that one Bitcoin left my account and was put into John's account. And that probably should not change down the line. If he has a hacker and says, no, you didn't give it, it's still in my account. So that's why blockchain is immutable or unchangeable. But it's also transparent, meaning that everybody has access to see the same ledger, to see exactly what's happening and who has what money. And so think about it as like a spreadsheet that everybody has access to. It's distributed. Again, that is to pull it away from, for example, the Federal Reserve and then put it in just the technology itself. And then there is this fascinating aspect of it called a smart contract that is, again, software engineers basically saying, hey, you know, we can do even more with it. And so in the example of me transferring a Bitcoin to John, then I can also have part of that transaction a contract that has something automatically happen. So for example, if I am getting money or giving money to John, then automatically his software could say, for example, send me a file. He doesn't have to do anything. It just automatically happens on that transaction. And so the technology itself is based upon math, and so it's not based upon politics, and so that is also a reason that it is seen to be very secure and trustworthy. So just to advance to the next slide and just show you a little bit why is it called blockchain. Don't worry, I'm not going to get too much into this, but essentially there's different blocks of information. For example, me transferring money to John would be one block, and we need to make sure that once that happens that people can't go back and change it, people being hackers. And so the blockchain actually has this really, really hard math formula, hard for computers to solve. It's designed to be hard. It's designed to take, I think, 8 to 10 minutes to solve. And the founders of blockchain said, okay, we know computers are always going to get faster and smarter. It's actually designed to get harder as computers get faster and smarter. And so that way, if it looks like somebody's hacking one of the old blocks, it will break the formula, the math won't work, it's invalid, and so that's how security is derived through blockchain. So that's just a little sketch of blockchain, but to me, that's not the interesting part. It's the so what moment. So what does this mean? So what is happening with blockchain? It's been 10 years. There's definitely more going on than Bitcoin. And so to have that conversation, first I would like to talk to Mark. So Mark Leswing is from Chicagoland, as I'm sure a lot of people know. And the city of Chicago is actually doing really some innovative stuff with blockchain. And so Mark, would you tell everybody what's happening there?
Yeah, so the city of Chicago is issuing municipal identification cards. So cards you can actually use to get all the city services, can identify you to not just the sovereign type process, but also businesses and to get discounts and community, use it for transit and things like that. The interesting part of it, instead of just a standard card that you issue as an identification mechanism, it actually has a connection into the blockchain world as well. So what's important about that is that in the blockchain world, identity is different than the identity that we talked about, I think in the last big session you had up here with passwords and all that kind of thing. So the idea is that every person manages their own identity, so they choose what can be displayed and where you can use my identity instead of me having to do it. So in today's world, I have the identities, and therefore it's up to me, and I take the risk of protecting the PII. In a blockchain world, you don't. It actually goes the other way. So the City Key project is actually what that project was all about.
Right. So again, I think the other panel talked about like Equifax being hacked. And so Equifax and many of these other, Target I think is another one, is a centralized provider that everyone goes to get the information. And the City Key project is fascinating because it takes away that centralized source and says that if you want my identity, you got to come to me.
That's right.
If you want his, you got to come to him. So what does that mean, Mark, as far as like MLSs and, you know, fast forward that for this audience, where do you think that could impact the industry?
Yeah, what it really means is that the many different facets of identification can be controlled here. So therefore, it's not just the person and their picture that sells, but actually other what they call Genesis documents, such as passports, birth certificates, things like this, are all in the blockchain itself. And the consumer decides what can be used and what can't be used. So if you think about the world of difference, I think everybody who's got a driver's license at one point, and when you turn 21, you show it at the door, there's no need to show all that information about you on the driver's license. All they really want to know is, are you 21? So in this mechanism, Rebecca, you can actually, the user can decide, I want to present the fact I am 21, don't have my address on here, don't have my picture on here, whatever, because that's what's important to the application itself. So the users are in control of that, and all the risk goes out of it for the MLS.
So do you think that other entities within real estate could contribute to that? And can you kind of paint that picture?
I think they can, and then the project there is called Uport, but the fact that you can actually move all that risk out just by using Uport, it's called Uport, using blockchain identity, you take all that risk of keeping all that information about the consumer out of it. So it's a simple application change, and it's available today. It actually does operate.
So available today?
Yep.
Cool, thank you. So John D. Michelle, earlier today, Michael Werzer did that great presentation about Netflix and how MLSs are moving with standards to be more like Netflix, to where the data isn't just replicated everywhere, and this allows MLSs to be the central source like Netflix and have a front end of choice. And I think the example of his front end of choice was Netflix can be on your phone, or it can be on your TV, or it can be on multiple different devices. And it's still accessing that centralized thing. But whereas blockchain kind of takes things from a central source and distributes it, can you explain what your thoughts are on front end of choice and how it might actually change the structure of real estate?
I think there are two real benefits to blockchain. There's two definitive streams. One is the transaction itself, and the second is the benefit to the MLS going down the road. So the transaction, you'll take out all the administrative burdens. Once the smart contracts are in place, you'll go from contract to conveyance quickly. Mark talked about these personal identification blocks, and we could start inventing acronyms if we really wanted to. So let's call them PIBs. And then you have corporate identification blocks. So once the participants have all been identified and they're all within the structure, the transaction moves quickly. Similarly, if you're looking at the MLS itself, you're going to have a database that will be locked down effectively, extremely secure, extremely safe, very cooperative in nature, and fast. There's a pharmaceutical company right now using blockchain. I think it's DHL and Accenture, and what they're doing is they've got, I think, 7 million different products on the system, and they're doing 1,500 transactions a second through the blockchain. So things will move really quickly and move very simply, but the concept of a front end of choice, data transfer, all these things will become very simple to do. And then we heard Jack talk about the reinvention of MLS. So front ends can concentrate on doing those amazing new things that we're all learning about today and thinking about, and it'll be very easy to do because you don't have to worry back end. Back end will be locked down.
Because the back end will be contained within the software itself versus going to a centralized source?
So I think the first iteration will be one centralized source, but then you'll connect them through different iterations of, let's say, controls in web. But I think if you look at the opportunities to overlay on top of this, it'll be very simple. And frankly, you can have, like you said, 10 different devices, 10 different applications actually accessing that
One
data.
blockchain.
That's right.
Okay, great. And John King, if MLSs and organized real estate moves towards blockchain, it's inevitable that the consumers will be affected by that. So please tell the audience what you think will happen to the consumer experience as a result of blockchain in real estate.
Sure. So when I think about blockchain, what it is, it's just a digital ledger, immutable. Records won't change. But think about what's actually available today. It's really like the financial applications like Bitcoin and Ethereum. You can send money directly from one person to another person without using a bank. In Bitcoin's example. So, like when you actually think about that, that's actually a very powerful thing. There's no more middleman bank that controls the flow of money, taking their fees, and Bitcoin can do that just very, very easily from peer to peer. So it makes peer to peer very easy. I think, at least in the short to medium terms, the real benefits of blockchains, the way blockchain will benefit the masses is really through financial applications. So sending money directly from one party to another, escrow is another example. And so what that means to end users also is that they make more money. They get to save more of their money, keep it in their pockets. But I don't think it also, I don't think only consumers benefit. I think end investors are up here too. So what I mean by that is like investors in mortgages, lenders who provide that financial capital directly to the buyer. So today there are lots of middlemen that could potentially be kind of obviated, because of a blockchain system. So mortgage banks, I think, have a lot of their value in bringing the connection between the investor to the consumer through a lot of work, but I think a lot of that's administrative. So to piggyback off of John's point, I think a lot of those tasks kind of go away and can be automated through a blockchain smart contract. So so in summary, I think it's just a lot more money will be saved by the actual parties that are funding the transaction or at the other end of the transaction, buying a property.
Well, in our prep call, you had mentioned that blockchain is sort of designed to take out a centralized source, right? Going back to taking out the Federal Reserve. And if software can take the place of a centralized source, one of the reasons I got interested is because MLSs are centralized sources of information. And so when we were chatting in preparation for this, I forget which John it was that mentioned that the software itself could facilitate access to the listings and to be paid for the access to that listing. And so why would an MLS need to, collect fees and do all of this stuff when actually the software could do it for you? So do you want to comment
Sure.
on, was that?
Yeah, I think that's part of the whole beauty of this as well. It'll be very efficient, and so when someone needs a couple of fields from that listing, they'll pay a very small amount of money to actually access those particular fields in order to accomplish what they need to do in order to have that transaction move through the process. So initially, I can't see huge costs for blockchain, and I think it'll make money eventually, and that's one of the opportunities for MLSs. We're preparing for that now. We want to be first at the table, just to be able to facilitate the transaction, but you're absolutely right. This will become a revenue stream.
So, but could it be I mean, doomsday, right? Could it be that there's an application out there that just connects consumers to each other, much like Uber did, that says this consumer is going to pay that to know about their house? Mark?
Yeah, I think you look at one of the great values of the MLS is clean and reliable data. So, and you remember, one of the hallmarks of blockchains is they never forget. Okay, so you want to be able to put good, clean data in, number one. Number two, as John was talking about, protect the ownership of who's actually, where'd that data come from. These are two things that blockchains do. So actually, there's no fear at all. And that's also a reason why I don't think you actually eliminate that cleaning of the data step. So still, it changes the role a little bit, but I'll tell you, you can really control the data to a maximum degree, and you still need the function of making sure it's good when it goes in, because you can't erase it later.
Right, you can't erase it later. Huh?
I just want to answer your question on realtors. I've heard everybody say that the realtor will always be part of the process, and I truly believe that. Now, I was in the field for 12 years, so I'm going to say that. I'm also CEO of the Toronto Real Estate Board, so I'm going to say that, but I mean it. And I think that this is not going to have an effect on the actual feet on the street situation at all.
Because realtors are more than just a piece of software.
Absolutely.
Right?
And more than just the data.
And more than just the data, right?
Yeah,
Josh?
but actually, yeah, I actually do think though something that does change is kind of who owns the data and like who is actually providing, like getting compensated for the data you provide is something that's going to be a little bit different. So today, people just mine our data publicly. Like if you're going on Facebook or some of the social media site, it's all available for somebody to mine. Potentially in a blockchain world, you have permissions to share what you want to divulge and get compensated for that. So there's no more free mining by outside parties. You'll get paid if you want to share that data. So that's how I think things could be different maybe in 5-10 years.
And that comes all the way around to the original discussion we had about identity, where I control the identity pieces.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Same way as John just talking about, you control who's got what.
And to get in, I know we're not supposed to get too technical, but once you get into the whole, the evolution of how the digital signatures will work, that's where the excitement happens, where you start, I know I'm a tech guy and it's exciting to me, might not be to you, but if you look at it from how that digital signature gets created, that's where a lot of the real elegance in this will come. Everybody will know who's doing it. It'll be completely transparent. It'll be available for audit. And I think it's probably the most secure avenue. And you mentioned it yourself. In 2008, when that white paper was written, we still really don't know who wrote it on Bitcoin. They're looking for a solution, and immediately the first reaction is no more counterfeiting of money. That was a first reaction.
Yep. And there's a lot of money being invested into blockchain and specifically the security standpoint. Mark, do you want to comment about some of the founders of the security element of blockchain?
Yeah, so some of the founders of that would be Uport on the Ethereum side, Sovereign on the Hyperledger side, but a group called Consensus out of New York, a very good group of technical folks. Anybody remembers Dave Conroy from the old shop? Is actually at Consensus now working with these kind of technologies. But these are the players who are out here.
But even with some of those, it's the actual people that founded the World Wide Web, right? Tim
okay,
Berners-Lee and
at the higher
W3C, and like so people that have proven track records in bringing you literally the internet are investing their brain power into this.
Yeah, because they invented the internet. They never realized what we'd all do to the internet. We started running commerce over it and email, and these are things that the original web was not designed to do. So they see these new blockchain concepts as kind of fixing the things that they never could foresee when they first designed the web.
Things like wire fraud, that will disappear.
It's done.
It's over once this comes into play. I think you've got, if you look at what's happening, who's actually in the game right now, and what was it, Distraction or Gamechanger? The game's afoot. Like, it's already happening. We've got Microsoft that's working with the United Nations to identify 1.1 billion people by 2020. It's called ID 2020 for human trafficking reasons. And so this is, it's around us. We're in it. And I think we have to look at what are the opportunities. I've gone to 2 different conferences now outside of our industry and listening to blockchain discussions. And at every one, they say the most natural vertical is real estate. kind of taking notes now, right? So.
Right. Well, as people think about heading back and facing into the wind to take off, what do you think that they should be doing as their next steps to prepare for blockchain and real estate? Thoughts?
Me? Okay, so
all three of you, and then
so first
that'll
of
be your
all,
final.
I think you have to open your mind a bit to what these new models can be like. And to do that, I recommend a book called Radical Markets by Eric Posner. Got to read it with a little bit of grain of salt, but it'll help you open up and understand how these markets really do develop. And once you understand that there is a different kind of market out there compared to what we have now, it'd be much easier to move into this blockchain technology for your businesses.
So read a book.
Read a book.
And that book again is called what?
Radical Markets by Eric Posner.
Radical Markets. Great.
Particularly Chapter 5.
Chapter 5. Save you some time.
Yeah, I think as the big players, the big minds are laying the infrastructure for blockchain. They can't solve everything. They're just laying the infrastructure. So as it pertains to real estate, I would ask the question to yourselves, like where could the benefit of a permanent ledger, a permanent record keeping system benefit your business directly? That could be in a data aspect, a financial aspect. But if that question, there's some answers to it, that might be a potential good use for blockchain for your area. Beyond that, I'm going to actually recommend that you buy some Bitcoin or some cryptocurrency. I always feel that people learn better when they have a stake in it. So don't blow your savings, right? But get some just to see how it works, and watch YouTube videos. I think that's the best training that I've ever had. Is just if I want to learn something new, just watch a video, and I can get up to speed very quickly. So yeah, I think those are the two things to focus on.
Great, thanks. John, final thoughts?
The change that the internet did, what we felt after the internet really started moving will be the exact same feeling we'll have once blockchain starts moving. It'll make our lives much more simple and more secure. You'll do transactions, you'll be happy to do them, you'll feel more confident doing them, and I believe it's the future. Actually, I believe it's right now.
It's the right now. Great. Well, thank you so much. Please help me thank the panel.